Okay, so I am Seshagiri. I'm with Accenture Mobility. I'm based out of San Jose, senior manager, and I focus on clients on the West Coast. Today we're going to be talking about mobility trends and what the security implications are. Please feel free to ask any questions as I cover the topics. So let's start with the scale of mobility compared to other distribution platforms. The world population at the end of 2012 crossed 7 billion. Compare that to the smartphones and mobile phones, that's about 6 billion. This is the estimated number at the end of 2012. Mobile technology is not just used in like mobile devices and phones. We see that impact in almost every aspect of our life. For example, the connected devices, right? So you have smart microwaves, refrigerators, smart grid, meters, and sports equipment, medical devices. So if you count all that, even like navigation equipment, entertainment equipment that you see in your cars and means of transportation. So 9 billion, that's a staggering number. And then it's just penetrating every aspect of our life. Now let's take a look at the growth, tremendous growth that we have seen in the past years. There's a statistic, at the end of December last year, Android had 3.9 million activations per week, right? So these are new devices that are getting activated. And compare that with Apple, that's close to about 1.7 million devices per week, right? So all in all, it's growing at a tremendous pace, 21% cumulative annual growth rate. And this is mainly being driven by consumer, and the growth in that consumer is actually driving adoption in the enterprise, right? So almost 70% of this growth is coming from the consumer base. So tremendous growth. Another key trend is consumerization. As we said, like if you look at the shipments of new mobile devices, mainly like driven by consumers, and some of the research reports from Gartner and Forrester, very interesting facts. If you look at the mobile web access, right, it's overtaking web access through the traditional means like PCs, right? And this growth is kind of percolating into the workplace as well. More and more consumers and employees are bringing their cool devices to work and expect the same type of benefit and convenience in the workplace. So, you are seeing the effect of that. How are enterprises tackling this trend, right? So there's another interesting statistic. By the end of 2016, 60% of the enterprises will kind of implement some kind of network zoning, which means that any personal device that is accessing corporate data, it'll be kind of restricted. So it's not like you're getting your device to work, but you're able to access all the data or applications that you would otherwise do with your laptop, right? So there's already that trend that is happening. So with all this consumerization that is taking place, what are the hurdles that an enterprise faces, or what are the barriers for increased mobile use in the workplace? So you can think of it like there's different categories. Some of them could be security, some of them could be resource or budget constraints, some of them could be technology challenges, some of them are regulatory and legal compliance issues. Some of them are pretty plain simple, like awareness, right? So what should I do with my device? Do I have, what type of behavior is expected, right? So these are all the types of concerns, but by far, according to a recent survey that got published, security is the top concern, right? So, so on one hand, you have all this consumerization that is taking place. People want to get their devices, but then how do you handle security, right? So we'll talk about BYOD. It is one of the hottest trends, direct consequence of what is happening in the consumer world. People are getting mobile devices to work. So what does this mean, right? Let's first recapitulate what the trends are, right? Consumerization, we talked about that. We talked about consumer spend behavior. This is basically like everyone wants to get the next cool device, right? And expect that whatever experience they're having in their personal life, they want to kind of say, hey, I'm being more productive in my personal life. Let me get that aspect to work as well, right? The devices are evolving very rapidly. You have a dynamic workplace, so things like productivity, work becoming more mobile, employees increasingly working from home. So these are kind of trends that are driving BYOD to some extent. And then you have factors like capital budgets, right? So enterprises that are that would spend on mobile devices, they can kind of take a step back and say, hey, what if I let the employees get their own devices so I don't have to spend my capital budget on that, but at the same time I want to spend my resources on securing the access in case like an employee gets their own device, right? Policies like that. So there are many unanswered questions, right? So what to bring, right? What type of device? I mean, do you bring your own device, or do you buy the device from an enterprise perspective, or do you subsidize the device? What about apps? Is it the consumer apps, or is it enterprise apps or corporate apps? What about the data, personal data versus corporate data? And what about the data plan? Does the enterprise pay for it, or there's also a personal aspect to that, right? So how do you handle that? And then of course the issue of ownership. Who is responsible, right? Is the legal liability on the user, or is it on the enterprise? What about the devices? What types of devices should you allow? Is it smartphone, tablet, laptop, or a combination of those? So these are some of the unanswered questions when you're thinking about a BYOD strategy. And you need to take a hard look and basically analyze all these situations. What are the drivers and hurdles for BYOD implementation? So, of course, like there is a growing trend of consumerization. So the next cool thing, right? Tech is now cool. So that is one of the biggest drivers for BYOD. Also, another thing is that when the employee gets a personal device, it's like a benefit, right? Some people they view that it's easier to attract talent because of this flexibility. And also you have to look at cost savings, reduce device spend, and the IT expense. What are some of the hurdles to implementing BYOD? So this is a new trend, so there's very little legal precedents that have been established. So you are kind of in some way treading on uncharted territory, right? And there's also the challenge, which is technological in nature, which is basically There's, like for example, if you take Android device, right? What type of compliance does it have in terms of security? Some, and because of the device fragmentation, some vendor, some OEM vendor implements Android in a certain fashion, and versus a different vendor. Same thing with iOS. And you also have to look at the challenge of OS upgrade. How many times have we upgraded our laptops? I mean, basically the security patch that is available, right? Now think about it, the problem is much more complicated when you get to mobile devices and different vendors and OS versions. And then you have applications are used differently in different devices. So there's not a consistent way of describing that. So you need to make sure that when you're running a BYOD program, you think through that, how to overcome that aspect, the application management. And last but not the least, there's different stakeholders. There's IT, and then there's the business. Each one have their own focus. So you need to make sure things are in alignment. And this often causes a lot of friction. So is there a secret sauce of getting this BYOD initiative right? So you need to look at, we talked about different hurdles. Some of them are technology focused, some of them are organization and user focused, some of them are process focused. So you need to look at an integrated approach. It's not just technology. I mean, what type of MDM or mobile application management or devices that you use, or type of network access that you allow, but it's also like user behavior, right? For example, HR users and applications are completely different in terms of usage pattern and compared to a sales organization, right? The user experience may be different. The frequency of usage may be different. So you need to keep in mind all those aspects as well. And then there are the processes. For example, activities from identifying, supporting devices, analyzing device capabilities, and in different, like when offering different functions, right? Like for example, technology lifecycle management, expense management, and IT support, and so on. So in order to get this right, you need to look at the holistic picture on technology, organization, and processes. So what we have seen is when we implement, when we see our clients implement BYOD initiatives, a lot of them, they have like gravitate towards like one of these three areas. Some of them are more technology focused, some of them are security focused, some of them are business focused. And for the right or wrong reason, I mean, like let's look at the technology focus, right? So it's typically led by IT and security. The focus is on maintenance, support, ease of management, and so on. And there's a lot of focus on software and tools, right? If you have the security focus, it's typically, again, led by this IT security group or the security group. And the emphasis is on risk management and data protection, and heavily weighted towards security aspects, right? And if you look at the business side of things, it's led by the users, the business users, for example, like sales or so and so on. And it's heavily weighted towards user experience and like convenience and productivity, right? And they have their own preferences. Like, for example, I mean, it's cool to use an iPad, go in front of a client, and able to close the sale much quicker. So it's like the ease of use and convenience. So what we have seen is a successful strategy needs to take into account all the three areas, right? So what we have found is mainly like 6 initiatives that cover all aspects. You first need to look at the overall BYOD program goal and objective. What are you trying to achieve? Do you have like a business case for that? for example, is the focus on increasing the productivity and user experience, or is it, and what are the trade-offs that you need to make, right, in terms of securing corporate data and not putting your corporate assets at risk. Then comes the risk assessment part. What are you trying to protect, right? Is it the applications? Is it the data? And how are you trying to protect? And when you get into how the how part, you'll need to look at the technologies that are available in order to facilitate this. And then, of course, it's not just, I mean, you buy a tool and with some magic it just works, right? So you need to think through and look at your policies, right? What are the processes? What is the methodology? What is your security policy? Who is allowed to access the data? Things of that nature. And then, of course, you need to analyze the user behavior, right? Sales organization behaves in a certain way, and they have certain usage patterns. Likewise, the other departments. So it's a holistic way of looking at the problem. So what are the different aspects of managing BYOD? You need to look at the entire life cycle of the device and applications. First, with the provisioning, I mean, how are devices enabled? How are users onboarded onto this program, right? Those aspects. Once these are rolled out in production, what do you need to worry about? What are the tools and processes required to make this go smoothly? Once you roll out, what are the things, what are the metrics that you need to monitor, right? Is it successfully meeting your goals that you defined in terms of increasing productivity, reducing cost, or ease of use? What are the approaches that you are having for support and maintenance? What if a hardware device fails, right? Those aspects. What about application maintenance? So all those aspects. And then the last part of the life cycle is decommissioning, which is when an employee leaves the company, what is the policy? Do you wipe out, use remote wipe out of all the corporate data? Because it's a personal device, right? So how do you handle that? What if a device is stolen, right? Because these are not entirely corporate-owned devices. It could be like employee-owned. What if the device is stolen? It has a footprint of some corporate data and credentials. How do you handle that? So the security needs to be evaluated end to end. It's not just your device, aspects that are covered by BYOD. You also need to look at the applications, right? When you develop an application, applications tend to use data, right? It could be corporate data or private data. When you are developing an application, how do you treat that data? Do you store it locally and potentially expose it to external threats? Like, for example, I could have an application, corporate application, and I'm pulling in email or, like, let's say a report, right? And then I tether the device to a laptop. So it could kind of, it's a potential threat because some malware on the laptop could kind of pull the sensitive data out. So then there is the network internet service provider. That interface, I mean, basically when you are connecting over the wide area network to the ISP, how secure is that? Is it on the cloud? Is it in a data center? How is that, what is that connectivity? What are the characteristics of that? Can it be like compromised, right? The next is the network aspect. So this is the corporate network. So when you're accessing using Wi-Fi, what are the policy aspects? what is your authentication mechanism, right? And is it prone to snooping? Those kind of things as well. And then, of course, one of the most important things is corporate data. So you need to look at the back end, right? The database security and the server application security. So when you look at a mobile security strategy, it has to cover the core business drivers, the existing technologies, the roadmap, the compliance, security compliance. Sometimes, like, when you're in federal, they have certain security guidelines. In health, there's the HIPAA guidelines. And when you're looking at mobile payments, then there's the PCI guidelines, right? So, and there could be, for example, a large enterprise, they could have a corporate-wide compliance, their own flavor of it. So we need to make sure that all these aspects are covered as well. And then last but not the least, you have, these, you can talk about technology, you can talk about process, but it's ultimately comes down to awareness and individual behavior, right? So how careful are you when you're handling with corporate data with mobile devices? So you need to look at awareness and training aspects as well. What are the top security challenges? I think we covered some of these, and it's very important to have enterprise-wide mobile security strategy. What are the key things there? You need to look at the entire software development life cycle, make sure that your applications have security aspect plugged into it. Then you have how do you handle the data access through devices and systems. What are some of the vulnerabilities in your system, right? It could be in your mobile application, it could be in the back end, or it could be in the network. Then you have always the trade-off between balancing user experience versus security. So in any organization, you will find the emphasis like tilting one way versus other. You need to understand how much are you willing to give in terms of corporate security to enable like user experience. Because at the end of the day, if the user experience is not bad, then the application or the program adoption will suffer. Thereby, like, your business goal of increasing productivity through this program is compromised. So how do you handle lost or stolen devices, right? So that's a key thing. And often, like mobile devices, especially if you are personal, like you can be at a party or a restaurant and you lose the device. So what happens in those scenarios? How do you take care of that? So at the center, we should have like a mobile a security strategy. So this basically is a comprehensive program that embeds security into every aspect of the mobile enterprise lifecycle. So starting with governance, rules, policies, ownership, connectivity, and privacy. Governance also covers the training and support. Then you have the users, and we kind of talked about roles and authentication. Who is allowed to access what type of data, what type of applications, and how do you monitor those types of situations. Then you have the application. So when you're doing application development in your organization, where is security in your software development lifecycle, right? Applications use data, and you need to treat data securely. So you make sure that it's not saving locally or keeping a local copy, or if it's communicating over the network, make sure that it's encrypted. Then you get into the data. So it's what data, right? Is it personal data? Is it corporate data? Is it data? What are you doing with data at rest? What are you doing with data in transit? when you're communicating over the network. And then how do you handle data loss prevention? Then there's the network aspect, right? So do you allow all these types of devices irrespective to go on your corporate network, or do you want to do some kind of segmentation, right? So for example, like a class of users that need to access like less critical data, maybe you can segment them in one part of the network versus a class of users that's handling like more sensitive data, right? So also like trusted and untrusted networks. So aspects like that. And then the device itself. So how are you going to handle like device management, application management? How are you going to handle the disposal and remote wipe of data? Let's say like you're in a situation where the device is compromised, right? So once you detect the situation, how are you going to handle that? So there's policies that you need to think about to do the remote wipe. So what are some of the use cases for mobile security? So in case of consumer applications, of course the prime most is the protection of consumer data and making sure that the communication between the service provider and the application is secure. And then, of course, maintaining the trust. There was an incident a couple of years back where a large financial institution rolled out a consumer application, and then they found out that some of the passwords and username and certain credentials, they were getting stored locally in a file on the iPhone, right? So that's a clear breach of the security guideline. So it could be possible that when, for example, the person is syncing onto his laptop, some malware could take the sensitive data out and basically like put it in the wrong hands. So it's a very serious issue. Enterprise mobile application. So you have protection. In this case, you have protection of the corporate data, right? So you also have to worry about how you are distributing these applications. Who has access to download those applications, right? Then you have the enterprise BYOD, which is user-owned. So essentially, the liability is on the user. So in this case, you have a mix. So the device can have access to both personal data as well as corporate data. So you need to draw a balance between corporate and private. You also have to look at the governance and procedures for controlling the functionality. For example, remote wiping of the device, and also what type of native controls that you want to give access to the application itself. Then you have the enterprise provisioned devices, which are where the liability is on the corporation. So in that case, corporations tend to provision much stringent security policies, right? So as opposed to like limited control of the device in the user-owned case. Then you have email, desktop virtualization. Again, desktop virtualization is essentially like most of the data and the processing happens in the cloud or in the enterprise system, and then the client itself has very thin functionality. I mean, basically like user input and display, those kind of things. So it's conceivable that some of these smartphones and tablet devices are operating in that mode, right? Any questions so far? Okay, so in a nutshell, like if you were to look at where are your threats coming from potentially, right? So any interface on the mobile device is a potential threat boundary. The tether that you put to your mobile device, that could be one. Your SMS channel with the service provider could be another threat boundary. The data access on the Wi-Fi is a threat boundary. The data access through through the cellular network to going to your ISP and any other system that is in the cloud, all those back-end interfaces also could be a potential threat boundary. So as you can see, you need to look at the gaps in the end-to-end mobile security, right? It's not just one interface or anything. Anything could go wrong in the chain of events. So what are the key mobile security considerations? So when you are, one scenario could be customer data manipulation. So let's say, what is the impact, right? Let's say you have a compromised device. So this device, you can mine the data and then basically misuse that, right? You can steal the identity of the consumer or the employee. You also have to look at the churn rate. So for example, let's say like I'm a consumer and I've basically found out that my private data has been compromised. I go to the AT&T and ask them, hey, my identity was stolen. So who is liable, right? So it's not it's very tough to explain that type of situation, and basically, ultimately, it could potentially result in loss of reputation and bad user experience, right? So mobile applications, again, these mobile applications have, transmit data like location, they transmit like your, let's say you're doing a bank transaction, so you're exchanging some credentials, and there's information, financial information sensitive that could be compromised. If there is any malware, it could potentially do some damage. Then you have the issue of malicious code, right? So this like a virus, just like on a laptop. I think now with the increased proliferation of mobile devices and mobile computing, you will see that these type of threats become more and more common. What about compromise via wireless technologies? In a scenario where you're going to Starbucks and you are, checking your email, you would be surprised, right? Where there could be a malicious user that can have like a rogue access point. So you will be fooled into, logging into your. You'll think that you're logging securely, but it's actually traffic is kind of directed to your rogue access point, and then they even have like ways of authenticating and making it look genuine, right? So in that case, essentially whatever you are communicating is directly going to the wrong hands. And that's why I think aspects like penetration testing is very important in this type of scenarios. Loss of productivity, obviously, like when you get into these type of security situations, ultimately, like the main goal of having this type of BYOD or mobile devices, ultimate goal is to increase productivity. So these type of situations make you lose the trust, and you won't be confident of leveraging this for productivity. And most importantly, it's a user awareness. You need to know what you're handling, how sensitive that is. And there are behaviors like frequent password management, right? Making sure that you are complying to those guidelines, and employees need to be trained on those aspects. Mobile security to mitigate risks. So what does this mean? What can we do to contain this risk, right? So most importantly, it's mobile device policy management. It's what are the policies that you need to worry about? How do you do audits? how do you keep track of that? You need to make a security assessment and authorization. And then, as I mentioned, penetration testing becomes very important before you launch. When you do this, let's say proof of concept or rolling out the mobile application, make sure that you do this penetration testing to make sure that you're not transmitting the data into the wrong hands, right? Mobile architecture framework. So security has to be considered in the entire life cycle, and you need to know what aspects of security. I mean, is it data, network, device, and application, all those aspects, and what are the means to protect those? Cyber intelligence, so you have threat analysis, mobile malware analytics, and device forensics. Forensics is basically like how do you retrieve digital data, right? Let's say you have an incident of some misuse of corporate data. Is it possible to trace back, right? Go look into the device and basically recover data. Trusted software development and application portals. So you need to make sure that the applications are distributed the right way. So how do you manage those? Who is allowed to download? From where do you download, right? Those aspects. So we kind of covered this. Security is more than just technology. It's policies, processes, and also means to promote awareness. So basically, like from the policies, like you need to look at the procurement behaviors, as well as what are the policies, when can employees access, from where can they access? Is it just from the corporate environment, or is it from the home environment? And you need to make sure that you have policies that cover those aspects. From the processes point of view, you need to make sure you cover the means by which people can access mobile technologies. You need to prevent downloads of unapproved software through policy settings. Awareness, again, training is very important. It can influence the user behavior. If the individual is careful, then it's better managed. So, mobile security strategy. We kind of covered the requirements part, data loss and theft, risk and benefits, but I do want to mention something about containerization. So whenever you get into a situation where you have the private versus corporate, how do you handle that? So there are, I mean, you could think of your containerizing your application. So basically protect the data, but not the device, right? So you could have a policy like that. So layered security to protect data. Separate corporate data from the private content, right? And when you do remote wipe type of policies, you wipe out the corporate data and not affect the private content. And then compliance assessment and enforcement, as I mentioned, this different, federal has its own compliance rules. Healthcare industry has its own, and mobile payments, for example, has its own standards. And you need to make sure that when you're rolling out applications targeted towards those, you consider those security guidelines as well. Structured approach to security. It's very, very important to make sure that security is part of the entire life cycle, right? Whether it's BYOD or application development and so on. So you need to start with the plan and design. What are you protecting? How are you, what trade-offs are you making from, security point of view and also the user experience, right? What about design, build, and test? In the design and build, this is where you're actually building the application. So make sure you're not using APIs that are not allowed, right? Or you're not saving data inadvertently. Testing, you need to think about, what can hackers do? How can you get one step ahead of them, right? So penetration testing becomes very important in those type of scenarios. Deploy and run. So this is how you are implementing your security policies. Remote wipe and aspects like that. Thank you.